What if I told you that one of the most infamous murders in history, a 500-year-old cold case with two missing kids at the heart of it, is still completely wide open? This isn't just some old story from a dusty book. This is an active investigation, and you're about to become the detective. The question at the heart of it all is so simple, but it's baffled people for centuries. I mean, how do two royal princes, one of them a boy king, get put inside the most secure building in all of England, only to literally vanish into thin air? So let's meet our victims. We've got the 12-year-old King Edward V and his 10-year-old brother, Richard. The year is 1483, and the crime scene is the legendary Tower of London. But here's the thing. The window for this crime to even happen is incredibly small. Just listen to how quickly this all fell apart. In the spring of '83, the boys go into the tower, supposedly to get ready for Edward's big coronation. But by July 6th, their own uncle, Richard III, has taken the throne for himself. A few months later, by the end of summer, the boys are gone. And just a few weeks after that, rumors are already flying that they've been murdered. Rumors so strong they actually start a rebellion? And look, this isn't some piece of propaganda written years after the fact. This is a direct quote from a guy named Dominic Mancini, an Italian diplomat who was actually in London when all this was going down. He saw the dread building around the young king, who was apparently spending his days in confession, like a kid who knew his time was up. It's absolutely chilling. All right, so to solve this thing, we have to understand the crime scene. And if you're picturing some dark, gloomy dungeon, well, you're going to have to rethink that. The truth is, back in 1483, the tower wasn't really a prison. It was a palace, a pretty luxurious one at that. It was the traditional spot for kings to hang out before their coronation, and it was absolutely bustling with people, servants, doctors, staff all over the place. Pulling off a secret murder here, that would have been seriously difficult without anyone seeing anything. But then, we get this one crucial lead. According to the historians who wrote the official story later, the head of the tower, a guy loyal to the boys, flat out refused to be part of any sinister plot. So for one single night, the keys to where the princes were staying were handed over to a man named Sir James Tyrrell, a man who was fiercely loyal to the new king, Richard III. And suddenly, we have a very specific window of opportunity. So who would have had the motive to order a hit on two children? It's time to look at our lineup of suspects. In any cold case, the first question you always ask is the same. Cui bono? It's a simple Latin phrase that just means who benefits. And that one question helps us narrow down the list from everyone with power to the people who are truly dangerous. For 500 years, the prime suspect has been the boy's uncle, Richard III. I mean, he got the crown, but it completely destroyed his reputation. Then you have the Duke of Buckingham, Richard's right-hand man, who turned on him. Did he kill the boys to try and frame the king? And finally, you've got Henry Tudor, the ultimate outsider who ended up winning everything. The two princes were the only real thing standing between him and the throne. But wait, the list doesn't stop there. We've got some dark horses. There's Margaret Beaufort, Henry Tudor's incredibly ambitious mother. She was a master strategist, always playing the long game. And then there's John Howard, the guy in charge of security, who just so happened to be granted the younger prince's lands right after the boys went missing. Talk about a clear financial motive. Okay, so with a suspect list this strong, you think the physical evidence would be the thing to crack the case. But that's where this whole investigation just completely falls apart. Fast forward almost 200 years after they disappeared, and a huge discovery. Workmen are doing renovations on a staircase inside the tower, and they find a wooden chest. And inside, the skeletons of two children. It really seems like the mystery is finally solved. Or was it? Because when you start to look a little closer, this supposedly slam-dunk piece of evidence starts to look pretty darn shaky. So get this. The only major scientific study done on these bones was way back in 1933. They said, yeah, the ages seem to match the princes. But by today's standards, that study is basically useless. They couldn't even confirm the sex of the skeletons for sure, and they obviously had no access to carbon dating or DNA. And to this day, the royal family has refused to allow modern testing. So here's the crucial point. We don't have a body. And what about a confession? Well, the star witness, that Sir James Tyrrell guy, supposedly confessed to doing it on Richard's orders. But get this, it was 20 years later, right before he was about to be executed by the new king, Henry VII. There's no written record of it, and they only made it public after he was dead.
In a modern court, that would get thrown out instantly. So if the murder evidence is so weak, what if we're all looking at the wrong crime? What if the boys were never actually killed at all? Okay, let's look at the totally bizarre behavior of the prince's own mother, Elizabeth Woodville. In 1483, she's so scared of Richard III that she runs into a sealed-off sanctuary. But just 1 year later, she comes out and willingly hands her daughters over to him. Why on earth would any mother trust her daughters with the very man she supposedly believed had just murdered her sons? It makes no sense. This leads to a pretty radical theory. Maybe she made peace with Richard because she had cut a deal, had her sons smuggled to safety, and knew they were alive and well somewhere else. And this survival theory gets a lot more credible when this guy, Perkin Warbeck, shows up years later. He claims to be the younger Prince Richard, and he is so convincing that the prince's own aunt and a bunch of European kings officially recognize him. He knew secrets about the English court that some random imposter would have no way of knowing. And then, maybe the biggest clue of all is the silence. Richard III's government never once announced the boys' deaths. There was no state funeral, no official explanation, nothing. If they had just died of an illness, why not just say so and end the rumors? This total information vacuum is incredibly suspicious. But was it covering up a murder or a high-stakes escape? So, after 5 centuries of theories and speculation, where does that leave our cold case? Well, let's try to take it into a modern courtroom and see what happens. So, what's the verdict? First, the evidence against Richard III is purely circumstantial. There's no smoking gun. Second, we don't have a verified body, meaning the legal principle of corpus delicti, that a crime must be proven to have occurred, hasn't been met. And third, you've got multiple other credible suspects with very strong motives. In any modern court of law, the verdict would be clear: not guilty, due to reasonable doubt.
You know, this case really matters because it shows how often history is just written by the winners. The Tudor dynasty that came after Richard had every reason in the world to paint him as a child-killing monster, to make their own rule look legitimate. But now you've seen the raw evidence for yourself, the flawed forensics, the suspicious behavior, and the wild alternate theories. The case file is open. So based on everything you've just seen, who do you think was responsible? Let me know your verdict down in the comments.